part of this ISD research, Brian investigates the effects of cropping management practices on soil health and nutrient loss to subsurface drain water. Brian also received a Nuffield Scholarship in 2018 and is studying the intersection of soil health, water quality, and nutrient management. This focuses on the fundamental importance of soil health and related global efforts to regenerate agricultural soils. So I'll turn it over to Brian. Thanks.
Can everybody hear me okay? I need the mic up. Yes. So I want you to picture for a minute some land. Could be ground you're farming, maybe some ground you rent. You know, maybe the farm you grew up on, your garden, whatever it is. Just picture it in your mind for a minute. What if I told you that you could increase the size of your property, maybe double it, maybe even triple it, and it wouldn't cost you a penny? Would you do it? We're going to talk about how. So this is what I picture. I picture some land. So this is the farm I grew up on, just east of Waukon, not far from here. Grew up right here. 2001, in partnership with my brother, who's here today to heckle me. So built a new facility, so I've milked cows for 17 years. And then one beautiful winter morning, I had an epiphany. I realized that when you add up 8 feet of snow and $12 milk, you get a midlife crisis. So I said to heck with that, sold the cows. And so, you know, I wanted to do the sensible thing, you know, buy a Ferrari, get some hair, you know, whatever. But my wife had other ideas. She said she'd rather have a bald guy with a checking account. So, you know, go on that argument. So what did I do? I went back to school, get an engineering degree. So I did my undergrad, did some research on using biochar as a cover on manure lagoons. Kind of fell in love with soil and became fascinated with soil when I was in engineering school, of all things. So kept going, did my master's at Iowa State, ag engineering, did some soil health and water quality research while I was there. And then in 2018, I was extremely fortunate to get this Nuffield Scholarship. So I was able to travel all over the world, learn about soil health and regenerative agriculture. And then I hired on last year as an ag engineer for ISU Extension. And so now I'm back working with farmers again, so I've kind of gone full circle. What I want to do today is talk about, kind of what I've learned through this whole process, mostly the Nuffield Scholarship, some of the things I saw traveling around the world, more importantly, what I think it means for you guys in the future of your farms. So I'll start out, just do maybe a quick 10-minute trip around the world, talk about some of the countries I visited and what they're doing, as far as soil health efforts. And then I'll get into a little bit about, regenerative agriculture, what it is, what it means, how that fits with soil health. And then talk about, how do we harness, this regenerative agriculture movement with carbon and biology and all the things Barry talked about. How do we use that to our benefit? And then just finish up with some thoughts on, what that means for you and your farm. So we'll start out with, just some basics of different countries I visited and kind of what I saw. So as I mentioned on the bio, I was really looking at the intersection of soil health, nutrient management, and water quality. So that's kind of a big tent, but they're all related. They all tie together. So Argentina and Chile, some countries I visited, it's like the Wild West down there. There's no regulation. It's, just kind of a free-for-all in a way. Lots of political and economic instability. And that has a huge impact on how they farm and the way they do things because they can't plan ahead. If they can't figure out how to make money on something in a year or two, they don't do it. Essentially, no government oversight, no support for production ag. But, so their soil health efforts are really focused on short-term profit. And so you might think, well, they're probably not doing anything. But actually, they do use a lot of cover crops down there. They're the pioneers of no-till. They started no-till back in the 60s and 70s, because of the cost factor. So they're actually doing a lot with soil health. And if you want to know if cover crops can pay short term, they're figuring out how to do it. Because if it didn't, they wouldn't do it. This is my favorite slide from the whole trip. Hopefully you can see this here, but this is the best infiltration runoff comparison I've ever seen. Just got to throw that one in there. So Australia, you know, huge challenges with soil health in Australia. I'm sure you've all heard about the fires. So they're almost the opposite of what we are. Their challenges are too dry and salinity issues, but it's a soil health problem that can be addressed. Again, minimal support there from the government, so they're somewhat on their own, but the government is putting a lot of money into soil health in Australia. It's a huge nationwide push there. They know they got a problem. They got some serious environmental degradation, and they're putting some serious clout into trying to figure out how to fix it. Their soil health efforts, they have more of a, it's kind of the same outcome. They're more focused on long-term profit. They're not thinking, if I put in this cover crop, can I make $1 on it this year? They're thinking, I want to be in business 10 years from now, so their economy's more stable. They can think long-term. They're thinking, I do cover crops now, 10 years from now, I'll be able to stay in business because I can get my soil to hold some water. So, kind of a different way of looking at it. Canada, I was only up there just for a couple days up around Lake Erie, so not a lot of insight here, but saw a lot of good things happening there with cover crops and no-till and relay cropping and intercropping, so a lot of efforts there to do a better job, but they got some serious water quality problems. This picture, this is a drainage canal going straight into Lake Erie. I took that picture just a couple miles from where I took those other ones. You can see all that algae growth there, so their soil health efforts are really kind of driven by water quality. They've got all the problems with the algae blooms on Lake Erie, and so they're trying to figure out how they fix that. Oops. So New Zealand, we think we got regulations here. You haven't seen anything compared to what they've got in New Zealand. Very heavily regulated, so lots of public pressure on the industry there, particularly the dairy industry. They have to demonstrate how they're going to mitigate environmental concerns from their properties. The farmers are really, it's kind of similar, and I would compare it to the pork industry. Maybe here in Iowa, there's getting to be a lot of public pushback. They're, losing their social license to operate, you would say. The public's saying, hey, we don't like this. You guys got to deal with this and figure out how to clean it up. Again, basically no government support for agriculture. They're very heavily export dependent. So their soil health efforts are more driven by regulations and public pressure. So again, they're still working on soil health. It's kind of a different thing that's kind of pushing it there. EU countries, I lumped several together here. I don't have time to go through all of them, but France, UK, Ireland. I'm probably safe to pick on the Europeans. I think I'm far enough away there aren't any in the crowd here, but a lot of excessive tillage over there, kind of problems related to poor soil management. Barry did a great job going through, some of the issues around tillage and what it does to your soil, but, basically poor water infiltration, lots of erosion, but they've been at it for, thousands of years over there, so we got to give them a little bit of a break. It's kind of amazing that they can still get stuff to grow over there. We settled this country, 1850s-ish, started plowing things up. They've been growing crops over there for, ever, back since the Roman times or earlier. I took this picture at a farm show. They love to show off their tillage equipment. Scrape it right down to the bedrock and show you what it can do. So this is from Ireland. Anybody guess what's the #1 holiday in Ireland? Not St. Patrick's Day, it's the National Plowing Championships. They are fanatic about plowing. I don't know why, because they don't hardly have any soil. Only about 10% of their ag land's actually tillable, but yeah, they love their plowing show. The whole country shuts down for 3 days. Everybody goes to the National Plowing Championships. Just like our sports here, you got your local contest. If you're good, you get to go to the regional contest. You're really good, you get to go to the National Plowing Championship. So Took this picture in the UK. They had the fastest growing rock crop I've ever seen. Pretty amazing. They're sprouting right out of the ground there. So, you know, it's amazing they can get through this with a, you know, they have to use a no-till planter on this stuff. Can't really go in there and till that. They can still grow decent crop in there, surprisingly enough. But the real benefit of all those rocks, they can build all these cool looking rock walls, you know, make borders around all their fields. So at least they have a use for them. So their agriculture policy in the EU is all kind of governed by this, you know, Common Agricultural Policy, or CAP, they call it. They spend a huge amount of money on it, about 58 billion euros a year. It's about 30% of the total EU budget, so it's a massive program. Basically, they've decided we want our farmers to do things a certain way, and we're going to pay them to do it. And so that's, you know, they've made that decision as a society that that's how they're going to do things. So absolutely massive government support. You name it, there's a payment for it, especially what they call greening schemes. So that's things like cover crops, habitat plantings, you know, diverse rotations, you name it, they can get a payment to do it. But, you know, we all know there's no such thing as a free lunch. So along with those payments, there's a whole laundry list of regulations that they have to comply with. You know, I thought our farm bill and our farm programs were complicated until I went over there. I don't know how they keep track of it all. But I would say this is all subject to change. You know, this CAP program's super expensive. You know, you throw Brexit into the mix, it's just kind of chaos right now. I don't think anybody knows what's going to happen long term. So their soil health efforts are driven by, you know, they use kind of the carrots and sticks approach. They're like, you have to do this, but we're going to give you the money to do it with. So combination of regulations and government support that drive their efforts. I put the Netherlands separate because when it comes to regulations, they're kind of in a league by their own, I would say. So you know how much livestock we have here in Iowa. They have about 5 times the livestock density that we do, you know, per land area. And again, they've been farming there for 1,000 years or whatever. So you can imagine how much phosphorus they have in their soil. So they're phosphorus limited by regulation. They can only put on so much. Every other pound of phosphorus has to leave the country. So they do all kinds of manure separation, anaerobic digestion, biogas, biochar, all kinds of manure processing technologies to dewater that. So then they'll apply the liquid, you know, locally. It's got more nitrogen in it. They ship the solids and the phosphorus out of the country. But it's incredibly expensive to do this. You know, it's about $25 to $30 a ton. And then they have to pay the trucking on top of that to get that manure out of the country. So it's a big issue there, but you know, mainly just regulations are what push their soil health efforts in the Netherlands. So how do we stack up? How do we compare to what I've seen around the world? Well, how we're different, and this is probably not going to be a popular message, but we have it pretty easy when it comes to regulations, especially on the water quality side. Most of our things here are still voluntary. You know, you go to other countries, they would argue that we have a very generous farm program here and payments to farmers. You know, and there's not a whole lot of requirements to go along with those payments compared to other countries, you know, that I've visited. You know, again, mostly voluntary, pretty flexible, you know, requirements that we have here. So in a way, when you compare us to other parts of the world, we're pretty fortunate here. How we're the same is we've used a lot of technology and genetics and things like that to mask a lot of the soil degradation that's been happening, and we, you know, figured out how to keep improving yield. So we kind of tricked ourselves in a way. You know, we say we're leaving the farm, you know, better than we found it, or we're going to pass it to the next generation in better shape because we're increasing yields, right? Well, it has to be better. Not necessarily. The soil itself may actually be in worse shape. You know, we still have a lot of erosion out there, so just something to think about. But, you know, I thought, you know, I'm going to travel all over the world and see how other countries are going to do it. This is going to be great. I'm going to have all the answers. I'm going to come back to Iowa and just solve everything, right? No. So what I actually found traveling around is that farmers all over the world, we're all in the same boat. everybody's got the same problems. Farmers are getting older, land's super expensive, kids can't afford to farm, they don't want to farm, they're not encouraged to farm. Small towns are just, really struggling along with the small farms, starting to disappear. Still primarily, conventional, what we call chemically based agriculture, basically the way we've been doing things since kind of World War II era. And I heard this over and over again traveling around. Farmers they think the current production system is just broken. It doesn't work for the farmer because you can't control the price for your product. And so kind of just by design, commodity production just drives farmers out of business. I mean, that's just kind of the way it is. The low-cost guys are going to be more efficient, they're going to get bigger, and the guys that aren't so efficient are going to have to exit the business. And that's kind of our current way we do things. The exception I saw to this in many different countries were farms where they were using, regenerative principles, a lot of the soil health things. Those farms tended to be doing a lot better economically. They were thriving, they were creating new revenue streams, they were figuring out ways to bring young people back into the operation, and they were just having fun with farming again. I heard that over and over again, farming is fun again. So that's kind of what got me going down this regenerative ag path and thinking about, how can we implement this on more farms. So that brings us to the regenerative ag and soil health. So I just want to spend a few minutes talking about, kind of what that means, at least from my perspective. So we've already seen the definition, NRCS definition of what soil health is. I won't dwell on that, but, does anybody really know, what does that mean for you? How do you measure that on your farm? So one of the things I did in my Nuffield report was I proposed kind of a more specific definition of soil health and how you would measure that. So what I came up with is a healthy soil should have a rate of soil formation greater than the rate of soil loss. Aggregation, talked about the importance of that. You should be able to infiltrate a 25-year, 24-hour rain event. Now that's like a hydrological term that designers use, but basically what that means here, that's about a 5-inch rain. Can you infiltrate 5 inches of water in a day? Nutrients from external sources should be no greater than the amount you're removing with your crop. Nutrient loss to the environment, no greater than whatever the pre-row crop habitat was. And nutrient availability to the plant. Plants should have no observable symptoms of disease or nutrient deficiency. Now you're probably thinking, this guy must have been hitting the bong during lunch because this is impossible. And you're right. If you're farming in a conventional system, this is probably impossible. You're never going to get there. But I know people right here in the state of Iowa, maybe even here in this room, I don't know, that are awfully darn close on the first 4. That last one, that's going to be the toughest nut to crack, but I think we can get there. So it might not be as crazy as you think. So that's soil health. So then what's regenerative agriculture? So you've probably all, has everybody heard of Gabe Brown? Very popular name. Most of you have heard of Gabe. So he wrote this book called Dirt to Soil. And he had probably the best definition I've seen of regenerative agriculture. It's a renewal of food and farming systems which aims to regenerate topsoil, increase biodiversity, improve the carbon, mineral, and water cycles while increasing farm, ranch, and community profitability. Now that's a foreign concept there, isn't it? Profit. And ensuring an enjoyable quality of life. So wouldn't that be amazing if we could do that? I think we can get headed down that path with some of these regenerative ag techniques. But how do we boil that down? What does that look like? A lot of people ask, well, what is regenerative ag? How is it different than conventional or biological? There's all these definitions floating around. Well, what I came up with was the way I would define conventional agriculture is our focus has been on yield and labor efficiency. We hammer yield. That's the goal. We need more bushels, and we got to do more work with fewer people, right? Got to be labor efficient. In a regenerative system, the focus is more on improving the soil and the efficiency of the overall system. So it's kind of like the field of dreams analogy. You build it and they will come. The idea here is you build the soil health and the yields will come. And so the way I kind of think about all of this and how you use this system to your benefit is right here. You know, how do we harness the power of the soil biology to do these things for us that right now, if you're in a conventional system, the tillage, nutrient application, residue breakdown, pest and disease control, the biology can do that for you. How do we just kind of get out of the way, in a sense, and nurture that biology and let it do those things so we don't have to spend a bunch of money doing it? The other thing that I've heard said many times and found is that regenerative agriculture is more of a mindset. It's up here. This is your number one barrier to success in a regenerative farming system. And that's because we've been taught for decades that there's certain rules of farming. I took soils classes 20, 25 years ago. There's these kind of rules that we follow, so many pounds of nitrogen per bushel of corn, etc. But a lot of those things may actually be counterproductive in a regenerative system. And Barry did a great job, kind of talking about your management is going to have to change a little bit if you're going to go this direction. There's a great quote here from Jon Stika. He wrote this book called The Soil Owner's Manual. I think I saw one floating around here earlier. He said, "There is no system of production or soil amendment that will fix what is wrong with your soil. Only your understanding of how soil functions will fix what ails your soil." And I think that sums it up pretty well. It's a different mindset. It's learning about how the system works in a natural setting. How can we make that work in our row crop systems? And the reason it's so difficult to do this is because we've kind of been thinking about soil, the wrong way for decades. So this is kind of the old model, I would say, of how soil functions. So we recognized that there were chemical, physical, and biological components, but we gave more weight or paid more attention to the chemical part of it. That's your NPK, your pH, your herbicides, etc. Didn't give as much thought to the physical. That was just the thing there. It was like a pool. You put some nutrients in, you grew the crop in it, you took them back off. We didn't give a lot of thought to the importance of the physical characteristics of the soil. And then we recognized that there was biology there, but the biology usually was seen as a hindrance. It was preventing us from controlling that system the way we wanted to. So we get rid of it. If it moves, kill it, right? But then we figured out, no, wait a minute, this biology stuff's way more important than we thought. This is how we should look at soil. There's chemical, physical, biological, they're all important. They all interact, and we need to consider all of them in our farming systems. And that's definitely an improvement, but I still think it kind of completely misses the point of how we should look at and think about soil. This is how we should think about soil. It's a biological system at heart, and it's driven by carbon. So the biology determines and drives a lot of the chemical reactions that happen in the soil. The biology determines a lot of the physical characteristics that your soil will have. And carbon is the currency that some people say that makes the whole thing work. So it's kind of a different way of thinking about our soil and how it functions. The biology at heart is the most important in my mind. And just to demonstrate that, this is just a flow chart that shows how carbon moves through a corn crop. And now, don't worry about all the numbers, that's not that important. But there is one number here that I want you to look at. Carbon uptake in CO2 from the atmosphere. Now this is just an average 180 bushel corn crop. 30,000 pounds of carbon every year going into that corn crop. How many people are surprised by that number? Seeing a lot of hands. I was kind of shocked when I learned this. That's a lot of carbon. The point is, it's the plant that does that. It's not the fertilizer truck. Root exudates. We talked about the importance of that. You know, a portion of that carbon that plant's taken in from the atmosphere, it's pumping it into the soil to feed that soil biology, and that's how we build up our organic matter and improve our soils. Again, it's biology that does that. Plant respiration, biology. Microbial respiration, biology. Residue breakdown, residue production, biology. It's a biological system. It's not a chemistry set where we can just add some N, P, and K and call it good. So if we kind of, if we can get our heads around this biology stuff and the importance, how do we use that information? How do we harness the power of carbon and biology with our management? So there's a lot we don't know about how soil functions. You've heard some of that today already. It's just an incredibly complex, dynamic, constantly changing, living, breathing system. And complex systems, kind of by definition, are really hard to study with what we would call a reductionist science. So reductionist science is where you have a gadget, a widget, a system, whatever it is, and you take one thing and you change it, and then you measure the system and see what happens. But the problem with that approach, when you're looking at a living, changing system, is you can't just change one thing and not affect a bunch of other things. So, it's really difficult. We've come a long ways with, DNA sequencing and things like that. We understand a lot more about soil than we did even 10 years ago. But we still, when you look at the big picture, we have a pretty limited understanding. We kind of know what's there. We don't really know what they're all doing or, how it all fits together. But there's some simple things that we do know about how soil functions, and we can use that to our advantage. Number one, biological activity is the only way to build soil aggregates. And soil aggregates are the bedrock foundation. They are the building blocks of soil health. If you don't have good aggregation, you don't have healthy soil. Barry talked about how that's important for water infiltration, the whole works. You can still see it up here. Biological activity is the only way to get aggregates. Number two, diversity improves system health and resilience. We know that. We have the science that backs that up. Number three, plants feed carbon to soil biology via root exudates in exchange for nutrients. This is established science. We know this happens. We can use these three simple things. Don't need to know all the complex details. We can use this to reduce our inputs and regenerate soil. And so how do we do that? You do that with management. Because management is what determines which direction this system will go. So here's what, this would be kind of the current conventional approach to management. We start with bare soil in the wintertime, no plants growing. You have erosion, lost organic matter, lost nutrients, poor soil structure, broken water cycle. The water doesn't infiltrate, it runs off the surface. Soil's too anaerobic, not enough oxygen in it. And then what do? We try to fix it. We use tillage, chemicals, genetics, and technology. And then what do? Well, we just start over and do the same thing again the next year. And so we're kind of in this downward spiral here. But the problem is you will never fix a broken system with tillage, chemicals, genetics, or technology, but you can sure spend a lot of money trying. This is just kind of a downward spiral here. I call this the death cycle of a conventional farm. Who can tell me what's the number one agricultural export in Iowa? Soil, exactly. It's not corn, it's not soybeans, it's not hogs, it's soil. We send more soil down our river systems every year than anything else we produce, and we don't get paid a penny for it. So just take this whole system to its logical conclusion and ask yourself, where is that going to take us? But it doesn't have to be that way. We can take that whole system, turn it on its head, and move it in the other direction. You can start with covered soil, plant diversity, you have less erosion, less nutrient loss, more organic matter, better soil structure, get the water cycle to function, get the water to infiltrate instead of running off, get more oxygen in the soil, and now you have a functioning system. You have less need to fix the problem with tillage, chemicals, genetics, and technology. And I'm not knocking technology. There's a lot of great things about it, but it's not going to fix a degraded soil. Then you start that system all over again. Now you're moving in a better direction. You can regenerate that system rather than degrading it. And it's management that determines which direction the system goes. And that is the one thing that we can control. You can't control the weather, you can't control the crop prices, but you can control how you manage your farm and how you react to the conditions that are out there. So this is what I would call the life cycle of a regenerative farm. So how do we do that? We do that by harnessing the power of the soil microbiome. How many of you have heard the term microbiome? Quite a few hands. So basically it's just this whole community of organisms that live in the soil. About 17% of all of the stuff, all of the living stuff on the planet is in the soil under our feet. We can't see it. That's kind of mind-blowing to me. It's the most diverse ecosystem on the planet by far, and it is that soil microbiome that basically governs the productivity of ecosystems. It's also the digestive system and the immune system for your crop. So we're learning all kinds of new science about how all of this works, but there's a lot of science on the human side too, looking at the human gut microbiome and the importance of that for human health and just how you feel on a day-to-day basis. So there's all kinds of things going on there, protection against pathogens, synthesis of vitamins, immune system development, all kinds of things that this microbiome can do for you. Our human bodies have more non-human cells in them than human cells. Now, there's a whole lot of stuff in there, microbes living inside of us. If you flushed them all out of your system, you'd probably be dead in a couple of days. You can't function without it. Our soil is the same way. The soil food web, that's our soil microbiome. It provides, the digestive system. So what does soil do? It digests residue. That's what your stomach does. It makes those nutrients then available to your crops. That's what your intestines do. So the soil is a digestive system. And it also provides immune support. Plants can do all kinds of crazy, amazing stuff. They can send out hormonal signals into the soil if they get attacked by an insect. And they can say, hey, everybody get ready, the insects are coming. They can call microbes that they need to fend off that attack with specific things, signals they send into the soil. That's how their immune system works. It's on the outside in the soil versus ours, it's on the inside. But it's really just two different sides of the same coin. So what happens if you knock out your microbiome? What happens if it's not working the way it should? You get sick. Same thing with our soil. If your soil microbiome isn't properly functioning, you're going to have sick soil. Spring chills, summer fever, trouble breathing, excessive thirst, diarrhea. Sound familiar? You can have all those in the same year in a soil because your soil microbiome isn't functioning the way it needs to. But all this microbiome stuff, it's super complicated. I don't even understand 1% of it myself, so it's like, how do I explain this to other people? And so I came up with a simple little analogy. And I realized that all we really need to know about soil we learned in kindergarten. So this is our soil stomach here, and we're going to feed it. So what do we do here in Iowa? We grow basically two crops for the most part. we grow corn, and we grow soybeans. So we're going to feed those to our soil stomach. I just renamed them. So we got cheese and hot dogs. I mean, who didn't love cheese and hot dogs when they were a kid, right? Everybody loved cheese and hot dogs. Heck, I like cheese so much sometimes I even bother with the hot dogs. Just continuous cheese. So that's what we're feeding our soil stomachs. We got 2 crops. But, you know, you eat like that for a couple weeks, and, you know, I'm telling Mom I got a tummy ache. I don't feel good. You know, all I'm eating is cheese and hot dogs. But, you know, it's probably just a bug, right? You know what's going around. Everybody's got it. We'll just hit it with an antibiotic. That'll clear it up, right? So we hit it with an antibiotic, you know, feel better for a little while. But then, you know, a couple weeks later, gosh, I'm sick again. Just can't get it cleared up. I'm sluggish, I don't have any energy, I don't feel good. I need an afternoon pick-me-up to get me beyond recess and get me through school. So I'll just hit a little cocaine. Now we're cranking. Oh man, I'm feeling good. I got energy. System's working. We're firing on all cylinders now. We got a productive system here now, right? We are cranking. Problem with that is, you know, we do that for maybe 4 months out of the year, and Barry even say it's really only about 2 months out of the year that we're feeding the system this way. And what do we do the rest of the year? Well, I just eat leftovers. I make up a big old batch of cheese and hot dogs to get me through the whole year, and then I just eat leftovers all winter. That's all we got out there. Well, I don't know about you guys, but, you know, if I ate like that for a year straight, that stuff would be running through my colon like a bullet train. So, now I got diarrhea. I'm pooping in the water, can't help it. Well, now we're in a pickle. Now I got a drug habit and I'm crapping my pants at school. So, great. I can fix this. Simple, easy solution. I can stop this. I just got to get this diarrhea cleared up. Everything will be fine. I'll just shove in a butt plug. we got a leaky system. We're just going to plug it up, right? We'll stop those nutrients at the edge of the field. So, all right, we're good now. But you know, trying to stop up this you know, diarrhea I got. But funny thing about diarrhea, I'm sure you've all had it. I don't care how tight you squeeze your butt cheeks together. It's coming out whether you like it or not. So you know, we still got diarrhea happening here. So I got to do something. I can't live like this. So you know, Mom's always nagging me about eating healthier, you know, and it'll make you feel better. So fine, whatever. I'll try it. I'll eat some lettuce salad. Make her happy. Shut her up. So, you know, we throw a little lettuce salad in the diet, and, you know, funny thing happens. Gosh, if I don't start feeling a little bit better. Got a little bit more diversity in the diet. You know, my microbiome is starting to function a little bit better. Now, I'm not ready to give up the cocaine. I mean, let's not get carried away here, but, you know, I'm thinking about it. Maybe cut back a little bit, you know. Giving it some thought. So, you know, gosh, that worked. Why not try something else? I'm gonna lay into all the vegetables. I'm gonna turn over a new leaf, start eating healthier. Now we're getting somewhere. Now we got some diversity in the diet. Starting to feel a lot better. My system's starting to work the way it should. So you know what? I'm going all in. I'm gonna just eat a healthy diet. You know, balanced diet, get all my nutrition, my fruits, my veggies, my grains, everything I need. And now the microbiome is functioning the way it should. We're feeding the soil stomach properly. And, you know, we can cut back on the pills and the blow and the antibiotics. The diarrhea goes away. And now the system's working the way it should. So that's just kind of a simple way to think about your soil, maybe a little bit differently than some people do, but we got to feed our soil a balanced diet if you want it to function properly.
You sure have a lot more interesting kindergarten teacher.
Yeah. I tell you what, that is hard. That's hard to explain to the principal. I was a little older than 5, but you know, you get. So how do we prepare for the next Green Revolution? This is really what I want to get to. You know, kind of figured out we got to change the way we grow crops. We got to feed our soil, get that microbiome to work. What does that mean for you on your farm? So how do we get ready for, other people use this term, the next Green Revolution. To me, that's what regenerative agriculture is. So right here is Cliff Notes version, right here. Number 1, follow the soil health principles. Number 2, address factors that limit productivity. And number 3, accelerate photosynthesis. This is how you make this work in your farm. So soil health principles, I won't spend much time on that. Barry did a fantastic job explaining how all of these work and the importance. But basically, the reason they work is they provide the air, food, water, and shelter that biology needs. You know, they're just like us. They need a place to sleep. They got to be able to breathe. They got to eat. So this is how you accomplish that. You know, I throw the livestock in with diversity. Some people are talking about context as another, you know, principle. I've added a 5th one here: nurture the soil microbiome. You know, we have to figure out somehow, how do we start weaning off the cocaine, weaning off the drugs. The approach I've seen people take, you know, different parts of the world, and everybody's does this differently. You know, every farm's different, but generally they start by trying to get rid of the fungicides. You know, our soils are very bacterially dominated, as you mentioned. Got to get the fungal populations back. So they'll try to start there and then work on, you know, pesticides and seed treatments and things like that, and start cutting back on the fertilizer and the herbicides. But, you know, you can do this kind of whatever works for you. But, you know, it's a little bit counterproductive to do all of this stuff, trying to get the biology back in your soil, and then you just turn around and kill it. So, you know, we got to figure out a balance there so we can keep that stuff alive. So, address factors that limit productivity. What's the number 1 productivity limiting factor in your field? Who thinks nitrogen or any nutrient? How about water? Seeing a few heads nodding. It's air. Think about it. You ever seen a drown-out spot? Those plants didn't die because they spent too much time drinking at the bar last night. They died because they can't breathe. They flood the soil. There's no oxygen there. The roots can't breathe. That's why they die. Lack of oxygen will kill your plants quicker than anything else. Generally, that can be your limiting factor is air. Then usually water. Then it can often be decomposition. You know, if you go down this path where you start doing no-till and your biology's not working yet, you're going to be up to your eyeballs in residue. You got to figure out how to get that stuff to break down. And then it's usually nutrients. And you know, the common thing is people want to jump right to number 4 because that's the way we've been trained to think about how we farm. We just focus on the nutrients. But if you don't address the other 3 along with it, it's not going to work very well. How do we do that? We do it with biology. I'm going to keep coming back to this. It's the biology that builds the aggregates, that allows you to get the air and the water into your soil. It's the biology that does the decomposition for you, and biology can help a lot with the nutrient cycling as well. So photosynthesis. It's basically, you know, I probably stole this from somebody else. It's the engine that drives the car down the road, basically. That's what makes the whole thing work. We can't control sunlight. Don't have any power over that, but what we can do is capture more of that sunlight with continuous growth. That's why it's important to have something growing, something out there the whole year, so we can capture more of that sunlight and put more carbon into the soil. So what limits photosynthesis? CO2. How do we get more CO2? Get more biological activity in your soil. You know, that soil breathes, it releases CO2, and you can raise the CO2 levels in the crop canopy if you have healthy functioning biology. That can help improve the system even more and improve your photosynthesis. Number 2, water. Again, got to build aggregates. That'll improve your water use efficiency. Number 3, sunlight. I just said we can't do anything about that, but what you can do is play around with different plant spacing, row spacing. You know, people are trying 60-inch corn and all kinds of crazy stuff to capture more sunlight. You can do multi-cropping, relay cropping. There's a lot of things you can do on your farm that will allow you to capture more sunlight per acre. Number 4, nutrients. You can get nutrients by liberating them from the soil with the biology. You can use foliar applications. It's often the micronutrients that can hold you back in a lot of these systems. You know, especially photosynthesis, things like manganese and magnesium and iron. You know, if you're short on those, even if the soil test says you have it, that doesn't really mean anything if the plant can't access it. So, you know, what I would recommend, you know, is do tissue testing or plant sap analysis or something like that, or just go do a test application on a small area, you know, with one of these nutrients if you think it's lacking, and see what happens. And then, you know, when you're starting out with this and you got a soil that's not very active, it's kind of dead, you might have to hook up the jumper cables and give it a jolt to get it started. You know, I'm not going to endorse any of them. Some of it's just a bunch of snake oil and probably doesn't work. Some of it's pretty good stuff, but there's a lot of biological products. You know, there's humates and seaweed products and AMF inoculants, all kinds of stuff that you can, you know, play around with on a small scale. You know, use some compost, whatever you need to kind of give that system a jump start, get that biology started. So how do you do this? How do you implement it on your farm? I thought Barry gave some, you know, awesome advice this morning. You know, simple, practical things that you can do to start down this, you know, path with no-till and cover crops. But really, you know, there's 100 different ways to do it. The important thing is follow the principles. Use those principles to guide your practices that you're going to select that work for you on your farm and your soil, with your management and your equipment, etc. But I guarantee you this can work on your farm. Guarantee it. That's a pretty bold statement. Now, because I didn't say it will work on your farm, I just said it can work. Whether it does work, that's up to you and your management, but it can work. And the reason I can say that is because these principles, that's how nature builds soil. If you have topsoil on your farm, that's how it got there. You know, geological processes move stuff around. But the only way to get healthy topsoil is with biological activity. Biology is what builds topsoil. So how will you know if it works? I don't have time to get into all of the practices and things like that, but end of the day, you try something, how do you know if it works? Number one, you can see it. Get a shovel, dig a hole, and look. It's the best soil health test out there is a shovel and a pair of eyeballs. You know, I spent thousands of hours looking at the soil on our farm. The problem was I was sitting in the tractor cab listening to AC/DC looking out the back window. You know, I took lots of soils classes in school. Nobody ever talked about a visual soil assessment or why it was important or how to do one. We're just, in the last 5 years or so, really starting to get that information out there. Super important, you know, not that hard to do. Get a shovel and just look at your soil. Number two, you have better water infiltration. Talked about aggregates, water infiltration. That's one of the first things people see after a couple, 3 years of cover crops and no-till. They just have much better water infiltration. That leads directly to number three. The neighbor gets the combine stuck and you don't. Pretty good indicator that you're heading in the right direction there. Number four, you reduce inputs, nothing happens. And it tells you maybe you were spending some money on some things you probably didn't need. Number 5, you have healthier crops. Again, healthier soil microbiome, better immune system, healthier crops. Number 6, you have more money in the bank. At the end of the day, that's the goal. You know, we all want to make more money, stay in business. Ideally, in a regenerative system, you can cut your input costs fairly significantly, and you don't have to lose any yield when you do this. There's a great quote from Gary Zimmer. He wrote The Biological Farmer that I think sums it up pretty well. If you have to jump up and down on your shovel to get it in the ground, you're probably not there yet. So how do you prepare your farm for, the next green revolution? You got to feed the soil microbiome. It's a paradigm shift in how we think about agriculture and what we do and why. Definition of a paradigm shift: a fundamental change in approach or underlying assumptions. That's exactly what we're talking about. It's a completely different way to think about, how we farm and why we do things the way we do. Use the power of the plant soil microbiome to regenerate your soil. That's the only thing that can do it. You do that by the things I just talked about: soil health principles, address the productivity factors, capture more sunlight, heal that soil microbiome. Cultivate a regenerative mindset. This is your biggest barrier right here, is convincing yourself that you can do this and it'll work on your farm. It's a complete transformation. It's a different way of looking at the world and how you do things. There's lots of great books out there. There's some sitting on the table here. Talk to people, go to field days, observe, learn from other people. Unfortunately, I didn't know any of this stuff when I was farming. I've kind of learned about all of this, just somewhat recently. But there's a lot of great information out there you can pick up on. Mimic natural systems to build soil. Listen to your weeds. Weeds are good indicator species. You can get a lot of valuable information. If you got a certain weed growing in a certain place, ask yourself, why is that weed there? What conditions are your soil providing that weed is thriving? Don't just worry about what chemical you need to kill it with. Ask yourself, what does that mean for your soil? What conditions are there that's allowing that weed to thrive? And the last thing I would say here is question everything you do. Ask why and keep asking why until you get to the root cause of the problem. And if the answer is, well, that's because of the way Dad did it, you probably want to rethink, how you're doing things. Get on the regenerative ag train or get run over. This is kind of my take-home message. I've traveled around the world, seen this happening in a lot of different countries. There are fundamental economic and environmental reasons why this makes sense. It's not a fad. It's not going to go away. To me, this is the future of agriculture. This is the next green revolution. Opt out of the conventional farm death cycle. Diversify the farm with new revenue streams. Super important if you want that farm to survive in the future. You want kids to have opportunity to come back. Right here, not everybody can do this, but direct marketing, alternative markets are going to be key. Especially if you want to, that's a way to create new income streams, bring people back to the operation. We're in pretty desperate need of that, and not everybody can do that, but to me, this right here, in the long run, is the only way you can guarantee that you're going to be able to stay in business in the long run. Because if you're just playing the commodities game, somebody's always going to lose. You can take all that market share from the wholesaler, the retailer, all that stuff, and put it in your pocket rather than sending it down the line. Be an early adopter. Start small, but start now. Don't wait on this. If you wait 20 years and everybody else has already done it, you pretty much missed the boat, and you're not going to get as many benefits out of this. Try new ideas, learn from each other. Use replicated check strips on your farm. Highly recommend this if you can. There's nothing that will convince you that this is going to work on your farm until you see it work on your farm. Mistakes are learning opportunities. You're going to make a lot of screw-ups. There'll be a lot of things you'll think were going to work and they don't work. Things you didn't think would work and they did. But you can learn from that. Just have fun with it. I've heard that again and again. Once people go down this route, kind of opens up a whole new world of possibilities and the way of thinking, and they really start having fun farming again. But, you know, you're going to screw up, so at least make them wonder how you did it. I still can't figure out how they did that. So you remember at the beginning, I asked you if you would grow your farm, if you would do it. Well, we've spent the last 150 years shrinking our farms by eroding away all of our topsoil. The soil that once used to look like that now often looks like this. It's time to turn this around. This is how you grow your farm. You grow it down with, you know, harnessing the power of biology and carbon and regenerative agriculture to rebuild your soil and rebuild our farming future. Thank you.